morning. I'm Savannah Sellers.
And I'm Joe Fryer. Right now on Morning News Now, breaking news. U.S. health agencies are recommending a pause in using the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine. The FDA and CDC warning of extremely rare blood clots. What that means for the 6.8 million who have already received the vaccine. Outrage, protests, and unrest continued for a second straight night in a Minneapolis suburb after police released dramatic body camera footage of their confrontation with 20-year-old Donte Wright during a traffic stop, ending with his death. The demands for peace and the demands for justice as the trial of Derek Chauvin continues nearby. Sharing safety, the rise in anti-Asian sentiment and violence in the U.S. has spurred the creation of numerous independent projects dedicated to easing anxious minds. We'll tell you about one New Yorker's effort to ensure a safe ride home for those who need it. And vaccination fascination. Curious kids are asking some of the toughest questions about the coronavirus shot. We've got the man who can answer them all. Our conversation with the one and only Nye The Science Guy coming up later this hour. We have plenty of questions about vaccines this morning.
We sure do. We're about to get to a bunch of them, especially with that breaking news.
Yeah.
We're following that breaking news involving Johnson & Johnson's coronavirus vaccine.
The FDA and CDC are now calling for a pause on the vaccine because of concerns over blood clots. The FDA says it's reviewing 6 cases of a severe type of blood clot in people who received the Johnson & Johnson shot. Right now, they say these reactions appear to be rare. Johnson & Johnson says it has found no connection between its vaccine and the blood clots. Johnson & Johnson is already facing supply shortages this week after an issue at a plant working on the vaccine. This could change the pace of the rollout as fears of a fourth surge grow. NBC News health and medical reporter Erica Edwards is following the latest on the pandemic this morning and this breaking news. So, Erica, what are you learning about the decision from the FDA and from the CDC?
Hi, good morning, Joe and Savannah. Yeah, so this was a joint decision, a joint statement by the FDA and CDC that they put out this morning saying that indeed they are pausing the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is made in partnership with Janssen Pharmaceuticals across the U.S. Now, so far, 6.8 million doses have been administered in this country. But the pause comes after 6 women between the ages of 18 and 48 developed really rare blood clots after receiving the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Of course, they're still investigating this. They're not saying that there's a causal link just yet, but certainly something to keep an eye on. Now, the CDC has said it will reconvene it's a meeting of its immunization committee tomorrow to further investigate the situation. I should also point out that COVID-19 itself carries a far higher risk for blood clots. So a little perspective there. Joe?
Wow, that's actually a really great point, Erica. Now, Erica, as you know, because we've been talking since last hour, but I will also share with our viewers, I personally just received the J&J vaccine on Thursday, so just a couple days ago. I'm 29, right in the middle of that 18 to 48, so I'm asking for myself and on behalf of the millions of people who have received this vaccine, what does this mean if you're waking up to this news this morning and you've just received this shot? And what has the FDA and the CDC said about those people? Is there anything that they should do or watch out for? Or is this rare enough that it's not a huge concern?
Well, first of all, it is rare. And it's interesting because I was just talking with some physicians yesterday about the AstraZeneca vaccine, which, of course, as we all know, is not approved for any use here in the U.S., but has also been linked to some of these rare blood clots in other countries. Now, I talked with some physicians saying, if people are concerned, what should they be looking for? And they said, if you start getting really odd headaches or other muscle aches in the few weeks following the vaccine, that, pay attention. But otherwise, again, these are 6 cases among 6.8 million doses so far administered. Overall, they're saying, don't worry, pay attention to the news. Obviously, the experts are going to weigh in and get more information from the company. But so far, they're saying, pause the panic.
And speaking of the company, Erica, what is Johnson & Johnson saying about this?
Yeah, they released a statement just a few minutes ago, and I'm going to read it for you right now. Of course, now on live TV, I'm not getting it. Okay, here we go. Read in part, at present, no clear causal relationship has been established between these rare events and the Janssen COVID-19 vaccine. We continue to work closely with experts and regulators to assess the data. And of course, they will be participating in that meeting tomorrow with the CDC.
And Erica, last quick question for you. I love the way that you just said, pause the panic. But, you know, I think as people continue to wake up to these questions about the safety of the vaccine, and keeping in mind that these are all emergency use vaccines, they have not actually been officially approved by the FDA. Explain to us a little bit about the logic behind pausing the panic. Let us know why we should, why it's okay, why we don't need to be concerned about the safety here when we do get headlines like this.
Well, that's a really good point. These are scary headlines, and it's important for us to continue to report on them, but also to continue to sort of provide some clarity and some context behind the headlines. And that's kind of where we're coming from with, of course, there's 6.8 million doses already administered. Now, what we need is more data. So as these companies apply for full approval, I think Pfizer will probably be the first one out of the gate. We will then see a fuller picture of all of the studies that have been done. More than 30,000 people in the U.S. actually participated in those Johnson & Johnson vaccine trials. So certainly there's a lot more data out there. We're certain to get that as they file for that full approval.
All right, Erica, thank you so much for your help understanding this big breaking news this morning.
Let's bring in Dr. Uche Blackstock. She's an MSNBC medical contributor and CEO of Advancing Health Equity. So, Dr. Blackstock, first of all, let's get your reaction to this. Are you concerned about it at all? And help us understand, what does a pause on the vaccine actually mean?
So good morning, Joe. Definitely this is disappointing news. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine was the vaccine that, it's single dose, easier to give, easier to store. It's being used as part of the rollout process. But I think what this pause shows is that, our system is working properly when you're having these concerning but rare events show up in patients who've received the vaccine. We need to put a pause, so stop giving out the vaccine until we determine whether or not there is a true causal relationship between the vaccine and the development of these clots in these 6 patients. I think what else will be shown is whether or not the incidence of these clots in the general public is the same, less, or more than what's happening in patients that have received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
And doctor, what do we know about these types of reactions? So you last hour told us the exact name of it, all that type of stuff. What do we know about what might happen to somebody? And we heard a little bit from Erica, but tell us what else to watch out for.
Right. And so, this condition is different from other types of blood clots. So this condition causes blood clotting in the passageways within the brain that help blood to flow from out of the brain. And so what this clot does, it could cause is bleeding within the brain, which is very serious and life-threatening. One of those 6 patients actually has died. But again, it's really important to look at that denominator. 7 million people, almost 7 million have received this vaccination, and only 6 cases have been reported. And so the pause is going to be put into effect so we can see, are there any other patients that have developed this condition? And also, how prevalent is this condition in people who have not received the vaccine?
And Dr. Blackstock, Johnson & Johnson was authorized by the FDA back in late February, so it's been rolling out nationwide for more than a month now. Millions of people have received this shot, including myself, just last Thursday.
Right.
We've been very excited about this shot because it was just that one dose, as you mentioned. What does it mean for people who have received it? And I'm also wondering if we know anything about the timeline here to be watching out for symptoms. After a certain point from having received the vaccine, are you sort of out of the woods, so to speak, or is that a question that we still don't have answered?
So in terms of these 6 people are actually seeing the development of this condition within a few weeks of receiving the vaccine. It looks like it's among, as you mentioned earlier, women, younger women specifically. And so again, we need to continue to follow the people who have received this vaccine to see if there is a causal relationship. But again, I'd like to emphasize to people that while it's a serious condition, it is extremely rare, and we should let the FDA and CDC do their work to determining whether or not there is a causal relationship.
Important point.
Yeah, Dr. Blackstock, thank you so much for your expertise this morning as we're all sort of digesting this news that is breaking. Now we want to get to that developing news overnight out of Minnesota.
A second night of protests over the death of Donte Wright, a black man shot and killed by an officer in Brooklyn Center just north of Minneapolis. Now, Brooklyn Center's police chief is calling the shooting an accident, saying body cam footage shows the officer meant to use a taser and not a gun. NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky has more on the investigation and the outrage.
And Joe, Savannah, good morning. And another tense night here in Brooklyn Center. Hundreds gathered outside the police station, not far from where I'm standing. But as officers tried to clear that scene, this strip of businesses was essentially left wide open to looters. And you can see just some of the damage left behind. The sprinkler system inside this one business shattered, flooding the whole building. Looters had hours to grab whatever they could before police cleared this scene. And today we're learning about the police officer who fired that fatal shot, a 26-year veteran of the force, who leaves another community in mourning. Overnight in Minnesota, another tense standoff in the streets. The Twin Cities under a state of emergency. Crowds protesting another deadly encounter between a black man and police, staying out through a dusk till dawn curfew. Gathering outside the Brooklyn Center Police Department. We have National Guard and Brooklyn Center Police pushing back hundreds of protesters block by block. Debris is being thrown right now, and they're moving them out. They're moving them out. Authorities deploying tear gas, flashbangs, and rubber bullets. Protesters fighting back with fireworks. The second night of chaos following the shooting death of 20-year-old Donte Wright, a black man, at the hands of a Brooklyn Center police officer, identified overnight as Kim Potter, the 26-year veteran now on administrative leave. Newly released body camera video capturing that fatal encounter. After Wright was pulled over for expired tags, officers discovered he had a warrant for his arrest. When they tried to take him into custody, Wright scrambled back into his vehicle. Then police say Officer Potter fired what was a fatal shot. After reviewing the video, Police Chief Tim Gannon calling the shooting an accident.
It is my belief that the officer had the intention to deploy their taser, but instead shot Mr. Wright with a single bullet.
Some protesters not buying that explanation.
I'm a beginner shooter, and I can tell the difference between a weight of a gun, the trigger of a gun, versus the trigger on a taser?
The medical examiner ruling Wright's death a homicide, saying he died from a gunshot wound to his chest. The mayor not mincing words.
I do fully support releasing the officer of her duties.
The family's pain clear as Donte Wright's aunt spoke out overnight.
Then he didn't deserve to die. He loved his family and we loved him.
And Wright's grieving mother demanding justice.
He was my life. He was my son. And I could never get that back.
And we have reached out to Kim Potter. Her attorney has declined to comment at this time. Meanwhile, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension is now investigating. We'll send it back to you.
Just miles away from the unrest that unfolded overnight in Brooklyn Center that you just saw, the trial of ex-Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin continues. The prosecution wrapping up their arguments as the defense prepares to take center stage. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez joins us now from the courthouse in Minneapolis with more. Hi, Gabe. Good morning.
Savannah, good morning. The judge has denied the defense's motion to sequester the jury because of the turmoil just north of here. Now, the prosecution is expected to wrap up its case, and that comes after it called its final witnesses.
Not far from the tense scene in Brooklyn Center.
This is obviously a high-profile case.
The defense is now preparing to make its case in the murder trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin. Chauvin's lawyer is expected to argue George Floyd died because of drug use and pre-existing medical conditions, and that Chauvin was distracted by the crowd of bystanders. It's not clear how many witnesses the defense will call or whether Chauvin himself will testify. But the new phase in the trial comes after the prosecution called its final witnesses Monday, including Chicago cardiologist Dr. Jonathan Rich.
I believe that Mr. George Floyd's death was absolutely preventable.
He testified that Floyd's death was caused by low oxygen levels.
Those low oxygen levels were induced by the prone restraint and positional asphyxiation that he was subjected to.
The jury also heard from a national use of force expert from South Carolina.
No reasonable officer would have believed that that was an appropriate, acceptable, or reasonable use of force.
But it was the emotional testimony from Floyd's younger brother that helped paint a picture of Floyd's life and family for the jury.
He just was like a person that everybody loved around the community. He just knew how to make people feel better.
Called by the prosecution as a spark of life witness, Philonise Floyd remembered their mother, who his brother cried out to in his final moments.
That's my mother. She's no longer with us right now, but that's my oldest brother, George. I miss both of them.
We spoke with him after he left the courtroom.
It felt good because I finally got the chance to let the world know who my brother really was. I'm fighting for justice right now, and that's what we're on the track trying to get.
The families of George Floyd and Donte Wright are expected to hold a joint news conference here in Minneapolis later today. Savannah?
Gabe, thank you so much.
Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savallo. So, Danny, as we just heard there, the prosecution is expected to wrap up. Then it's the defense's turn. The defense really only expected to take a few days. What are they going to focus on?
The defense is usually a lot shorter than the prosecution, mostly because they don't have a burden. And if they think they've made good points on the prosecution side, then they don't want to step up and risk any other damage on their defense case. They want to rest mainly on their burden. But in a case like this, they have to put out some kind of evidence of reasonableness of the force applied. And that's always the case in self-defense cases, similar in excessive force cases. So you can expect evidence as to causation to combat the prosecution's case that Derek Chauvin's knee in the back of the neck caused the death of George Floyd. The defense wants to show that, no, it was methamphetamines, it was fentanyl, it was George Floyd's poor health. And if they can show that these could have been a cause of his death independently of the knee in the back of the neck, or that the knee in the neck wasn't a causative, substantial cause, then they could be home free. But that is a large and long hill to climb.
Danny, the big question this week, will Derek Chauvin take the witness stand? Remind us, what are the pros and the cons of him doing that?
The straight up odds against a defendant taking the stand, usually 9 out of 10, they will not take the stand. Usually because it's just too risky. The rules of evidence, the way prosecutors can question, it's a game that's heavily weighed in favor of the prosecutor. And for that reason, it's so risky to put a client on the stand. But on the other hand, in a case like this where Derek Chauvin's frame of mind is important, even though there's all this video out there that makes him look bad, you have that the jury may want to hear from him. Plus, he is, as a police officer, presumably the best kind of witness. No one testifies more than police officers, not FBI agents, not lawyers. Police officers practice testifying every day on their cases or every other day or whenever they have court days. So definitely Derek Chauvin has been to court before and he knows how to testify to a jury.
It's a good reminder of that. Now, the prosecution needs unanimous agreement to convict Chauvin. The defense just needs to raise reasonable doubt with one of those jurors. So what is the strategy to try and see if they can get one juror to vote not guilty?
Likely, defense counsel has chosen 1 or 2 jurors that he will present the case to, hoping that that juror is an influencer among the jury, that that juror will advocate for Derek Chauvin in the jury room. And you're right, he only needs 1, but they don't want to hang this jury. They want a straight up acquittal if they can get it. So you know what they have to pound is the reasonable doubt standard, the presumption of innocence, and really pound the causation if they have the scientific evidence.
Danny, thank you so much. Appreciate it as always.
Investigators in Tennessee are looking into a shooting at a high school that left 1 student dead and a police officer injured. NBC News correspondent Kathy Park joins us now from Knoxville. Kathy, good morning. What can you tell us?
Savannah, good morning to you. It certainly is a difficult and heavy morning here for the Austin East High School community, still reeling from 4 separate off-campus shootings this year involving students. And you'll notice there's still a very large police presence behind me. And in the wake of this latest tragedy, classes are canceled today as well as tomorrow.
This morning, a Tennessee community shaken after a deadly officer-involved shooting at Austin East Magnet High School. A student killed and a police officer now in serious condition after being shot in the leg.
This time, the investigation remains active and ongoing.
Officers rushed to the school Monday afternoon after receiving reports of a student possibly armed with a gun.
As officers entered the space, the subject reportedly fired shots, striking an officer. One officer returned fire. The suspect was pronounced dead at the scene and has since been identified as a student.
For hours, parents were on edge, waiting for answers.
When I asked them what happened, they said that somebody was in there shooting. I'm thinking, God, are they students or who? You know, I mean, this is ridiculous. You know, kids can't go to school.
The terrifying scene happening in a community scarred by gun violence. In recent months, at least 4 current or former Austin East students have been killed in shootings.
It has to stop. We're losing our kids at an early age, and it is not fair to us or the parents to be burning these babies.
Another tragedy becoming a rallying cry for this community to take action.
Prayer is that the community will come together.
And police have not yet released the names of the injured officer or the student. And as the investigation continues, officials will be looking at the body camera worn by the officer at the time of the shooting. Savannah?
Kathy, thanks so much. Let's now take a look at your Morning News Now weather.
Bill Cairns is back with us. Hey, Bill.
Hey, good morning. So it's going to be a tale of two springs. Up to this point, we've seen very warm conditions east of the Rockies. It's been kind of a cool spring in areas of the west, and that is all going to flip-flop. So this is what it's been so far this spring. I mean, we talk about warm spring. I mean, all the red dots on this map are having their top 5 warmest start to springs on date. So, I mean, that's almost all of the northern plains and portions of the Great Lakes. But that is changing. The cold air has moved in. We're going to get several rounds of chilly air as we go throughout the next couple of days, and it looks like we're going to be in for this at least for the next 2 to 3 weeks. So we have cold air coming down from the north, and at the same time, a storm trying to come up from the south on Wednesday and Thursday. And that in April can be the recipe for some snow. And here we go. As we go into Wednesday night into Thursday, the green is the rain. When you start to see the blue on the map, that is snow. It looks like the higher elevations in the northeast are going to deal with a snowstorm, almost a nor'easter type storm by the time we go through Thursday night and Friday. The big cities will be all rain and a chilly cold rain, but at the highest of elevations, the Catskills, the Green Mountains, the Berkshires, those are the areas that could get some snow as we go through Thursday night into Friday. There's no leaves on the trees yet, so we're not worried about power outages or anything like that, but it can snow in the Northeast in April, and it's going to as we end this week. So the forecast for today, the sun returns to the Northeast. The Southeast is going to be warm in the 80s, and we have to watch out for some thunderstorms in Louisiana. I remember I said yesterday, you never know when you're going to give your last snow forecast. Not this week.
Not this week. Maybe next week. Fingers crossed.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Coming up, the personal stories of those who were inside the Capitol building on January 6th.
The lasting impressions American extremism has left behind. Next.
In the news this morning, the Chicago Cubs are worried about a possible COVID-19 outbreak among the team after 2 coaches have tested positive for the virus. 3 relievers have been placed on the COVID-19 related injured list. It's unclear whether the players have tested positive or if the move was done as a precaution after contact tracing efforts. The NCAA is standing with transgender athletes in college sports. Its board of governors is refusing to hold championship events in locations that aren't, quote, free of discrimination. This comes as more than 24 state legislatures consider bills that regulate which teams transgender people can join or whether they can play at all. The board did not name any specific states that have placed a ban or are considering bans. And in Detroit, check out this SUV doing donuts, but also check out that it's without its driver. A woman got locked outside of her car while it was stuck in reverse, driving in circles on the famed 8 Mile road. The woman chased the car but couldn't get in the driver's side door. A man who had stopped to help broke the driver's side window, jumped in and stopped the vehicle before anyone got hurt. That is some extreme video.
It was like a slow speed chase.
Yeah.
You have to go very far.
Some people on foot.
Round and round and round. All right. Thank you, Savannah.
Yeah.
Now to our network-wide series, American Extremism. This Friday marks 100 days since the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson spoke with several people who were there that day. They say the event took a toll on their lives.
For weeks, Anne-Marie Goizueta would walk to work through the security fence installed around the Capitol after January 6th.
It's hard to forget it when there's barbed wire in your face.
She was in her office that day, where she works as a congressional director of operations. So terrified, she texted a friend what she was wearing and where her car was parked in case her body and possessions needed to be identified.
You were that scared for your safety in your life?
I was. I sometimes just break down and cry, and then I realize, oh, I'm crying because I'm still reliving these moments.
These days, the security fence is gone, but the anxiety is not. Now, nightmares keep her from sleeping.
That's not something that I've really ever have experienced in the past. Just waking up in the middle of the night and gasping for air.
Goizueta reached out for help to the Congressional Employee Assistance Program, just one example of hundreds of the incredible surge in demand after the riots. NBC News has learned House counselors held nearly 1,200 individual or group consults or trainings in the 6 weeks after January 6th, a number that's grown steadily and nearly doubled the number of counselors on hand. They're on pace to be 200% busier than a typical year. It's similar in the Senate, which also beefed up its program. A congressional source says both the riot and the pandemic contributed to the uptick. Democratic Congressman Jason Crow is among a bipartisan group of lawmakers who have called for a sharper focus on mental health support.
Where do you see the gaps, the potential weaknesses in the structure around the resources to help people cope?
Well, one of the important gaps is the use of contractors and vendors. You were providing a service that day, we were exposed to this, so you should be eligible for an expanded set of services as well.
Rodney Davis says it's important for people to be able to share their stories. The Republican from Illinois was on the baseball field the day Congressman Steve Scalise and others were shot in 2017.
It was just natural for us as we were looking ahead to say, what can we do to help those who may never have experienced a traumatic event like that? And we began to plan the Zoom calls just a few weeks after January 6th.
He's hosting those regular Zoom meetings for staffers so they have an outlet, even informally. For Goizueta, sharing her struggle doesn't come easy, but she knows it matters.
If I can be a voice saying, hey, it's okay, I'm doing it too, then I'm happy to be that person.
Mexico, Honduras, and Guatemala have agreed with the Biden administration to boost troop numbers on their borders in an effort to curb the flow of migrants across Central America. The deal comes as the U.S. saw a record number of unaccompanied children trying to cross the border in March. MSNBC's Ayman Mohyeldin joins us now from Guatemala's capital, Guatemala City, where he's actually been speaking to the president of the country. Ayman, good morning. Thank you for joining us with this exclusive interview of yours. Now, first, let's just talk a little bit about what's happening there and what's driving thousands of people, including these unaccompanied children, to flee their country.
Yeah, the short answer to that really are the conditions on the ground, and that's what we've been seeing for ourselves over the past couple of days, both here in Guatemala City and in some of the rural areas once you go outside of the capital. The economic situation, the economic picture here is very grim. Half of the country's child population is malnourished. We went to a small rural village on the outskirts of Guatemala City. It's a bunch of families living together in makeshift huts, really. We spoke to one mother, a 24-year-old mother of 2 children. Both of her kids were malnourished, so much so that aid workers actually had to take one of her young-born children into custody to help get his weight back up. He has been returned to her, but it does give you a sense of how bad the malnutrition is in this country. In fact, the World Food Program says that 3.7 million people are suffering from food insecurity. And as I mentioned, children are suffering from malnutrition. A lot of the people here make less than $2 a day. So you get a grim sense of how bad the situation is. Now, we asked the president of Guatemala about what he thinks is the factor in all of this and whether or not the comments coming out of the White House, the Biden administration, are also contributing to the surge that we're seeing on the U.S. southern border. Here's his explanation. Watch this.
I am nobody to make a judgment here, but I believe in the first few weeks of the Biden administration, messages were confusing. There were compassionate messages that were understood by people in our country, especially the coyotes, to tell families, we'll take the children. The children can go in, and once the children are there, they will call their parents. And so those messages were confusing, not because of the way they were communicated, but because of the way they were translated here.
So to be clear, he's not blaming the Biden administration for the surge, but he is, as you heard there, saying that that message of compassion was exploited by the traffickers and the coyotes who smuggle people into the United States by coming back to places like Guatemala and saying to those who want to migrate, say, this is your window of opportunity. They're letting children in. And if you get the children in, you can then ultimately try to bring other family members. And that, the president said, was why it was so confusing early on in the Biden administration. Guys?
So, Eamon, what we're talking about then really is both push and pull factors, these situations in these countries that push these migrants out of their home country and bring them here, and the pull factor of, oh, we think when we get there, we will be safe. It will be OK, because that is what the president there was saying has been translated. Given both of those things, what does Guatemala's president think should be done to tackle this crisis?
Yeah, you know, that's an excellent question. And the term that he's using is a wall of prosperity. He was very critical of the Trump administration's approach about building walls to try to keep people out of the United States and keep people from crossing Mexico into the U.S. What he'd rather do is create a wall of prosperity in Guatemala that incentivizes people to stay here. Now, he says the key to that is going to be education, healthcare, economic opportunities, direct investment and assistance from neighboring countries. But he says he can't do it alone. It has to come with the help of the United States and Mexico. Now, the big concern, obviously, is that with more money being pumped into this country, the concern about corruption and good governance are right on top of that list, because this country has a dismal record of good governance. Corruption is rampant, organized crime is rampant, and it makes it almost impossible for this government here to use those resources to get the money to the people it needs. Let the president explain in his own words what he wants to see happen. Listen to this.
Our idea was received well by the White House, that we convert Guatemala into a prosperity wall. Physical walls don't stop people. We've witnessed this, but prosperity walls do. If the people have jobs, health, education, housing, and security, they don't leave.
And so as I was saying, excuse me there, the president says that the wall of prosperity is going to keep people here in Guatemala as opposed to wanting to go to the United States to seek those opportunities. He wants to create those opportunities right here in Guatemala. Guys?
Eamon, thank you so much. Iran's foreign minister says Israel has made a, quote, very bad gamble following Sunday's explosion at a key nuclear site. Mohammad Javad Zarif says Israel is mistaken if it thinks the attack would derail hopes of reviving the 2015 nuclear deal. The country is yet to officially comment on the incident. Iran is set to resume talks with major powers tomorrow in Vienna. NBC's Ali Arouzi joins us now from Tehran. Ali, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Now, Iran's foreign minister says this latest incident will strengthen his country's hand ahead of tomorrow's talks. How's this expected to play out?
Hey, Savannah. Well, tomorrow's talks are certainly going to be more complicated and tense after the attack on the Natanz nuclear facility, especially given that U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was in Israel at the same time the drama was unfolding. And as you mentioned, Iran's foreign minister speaking today alongside his Russian counterpart who is visiting Tehran had some tough words for the U.S. He said the Americans should know that neither sanctions nor sabotage would provide them with an instrument for talks, and that these actions are only going to make the situation more difficult for them. But he tried to spin the attack into Iran's favor as well, saying that, as you mentioned, it was a very bad gamble by Israel that's only going to strengthen Iran's hand in the negotiations. And he said that the attack on Natanz is only going to encourage Iran to install more advanced centrifuges at its nuclear facilities.
And now, Ali, is there any risk that this attack could make negotiations more difficult or even derail them altogether?
Well, Savannah, tomorrow's negotiations just got a lot more difficult with an sort of extra layer of mistrust between two countries that are already deeply suspicious of each other. Hardliners in Iran are urging the government to walk out of the Vienna talks, to suspend all nuclear commitments, to retaliate against Israel, and to break up this network of people that are conducting sabotage in Iran. They've also been very critical of Rouhani for continuing to talk with the U.S., but the Iranian delegation is on their way to Vienna, so they are going to continue talking.
And finally, Ali, is Iran hopeful that it can achieve its ultimate goal of having sanctions lifted?
Well, Savannah, a lot of the signals coming out of Tehran are ones of cautious optimism that sanctions will be lifted. For a start, they wouldn't be attending the talks if they thought progress wasn't being made. Senior government officials have been talking over the last few weeks about an end to the sanctions regime and the economy picking up. But they also acknowledge that it's going to be a difficult process, not least of all because Iran wants all sanctions removed before they return to their commitments. But most importantly, Iran hasn't given up on these talks because they badly need them to start working again. Without the U.S. rejoining the JCPOA, Iran's economy is just not going to revive itself.
All right, Ali, thank you so much.
Coming up, the troubling rise in anti-Asian sentiment here in the U.S. has also fostered projects aimed at supporting an anxious community.
How one New Yorker is ensuring a safe ride home for those who need it most. Up next.
Time to take a look at what's making news around the world this morning.
Matt Bradley is back with us from London. Hey, Matt.
Hey, guys. So, we've been talking a lot lately about the death of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. But here in Britain, they've really been talking a lot about it. And that's why all this talk has actually generated some complaints. The BBC has racked up over 100,000 complaints from the public about their wall-to-wall coverage of the prince's death. And this was after a few popular programs had been cut in order to pay tribute to the prince. So many saw the outpouring of tributes as a little bit excessive. And indeed, if you watch the BBC, it's been all day, every day. And in Norway, a Norwegian man was charged for his role in planning 3 terrorist attacks, 1 in London, 2 in Denmark. He was also charged with purportedly spreading Islamic State propaganda. The 24-year-old man hasn't been identified. You haven't heard of these attacks because British and Danish police purportedly thwarted them before they occurred. Now, that volcano in St. Vincent in the Caribbean, it's still exploding in grand cinematic style. And the biggest burst yet happened just yesterday when La Soufrière volcano fired an enormous amount of gas and hot ash into the air. This is causing a lot of authorities there to worry about those people who have refused to evacuate from the vicinity around the volcano. Guys.
All right, Matt, thank you so much.
Thanks, Matt.
Over the last year, we've been telling you about a disturbing trend, attacks on Asians and Asian Americans that have left many in the AAPI community afraid to leave their homes.
But one woman in New York is turning her fear into action with a new effort to make sure some of the most vulnerable people can get a safe ride to their destination. It's an effort that's raised more than $100,000 in just 2 days. And with that, we want to welcome Maddie Park, founder of Cafe Maddie Cab. Maddie, thank you so much for joining us. And first of all, let me just start by saying apologies if I tear up or anything, because I'm so moved by what you've done. It just makes me want to cry. And I know part of it was born out of your own experiences, and that you also started it with $2,000 of your own money, which is also just incredible. So tell us what inspired this.
Right. It really all started from my personal experience, because last week I took the train and the whole ride I was absolutely terrified. I didn't realize I would feel this way, but I came home and talked to my friends, and everybody that was Asian who was riding the train was feeling the same way. So I only have to go in the office once a week, and I decided to take a cab once a week. But I thought about all the people in the city who just simply can't afford cab rides for their safety. I've been a student in New York City for 7 years, and I know what it's like to be broke and to be choosing to walk or take the train because you simply can't afford to take a cab, even if it's not safe. So that's why I started this with my own money, thinking I would just send out some charges. But in 2 days, we got some overwhelming support and donations so that we're getting this program up and running.
I'm so sorry you had to go through this, Maddie, but it's incredible to see the response to what you've done. Now, you say that you'll cover Uber and Lyft drives up to $40 for elderly Asians, Asian women, and Asian LGBTQ groups. Explain to us how that works and how you're making sure that those are the folks who are getting the free rides.
Right. So we announced everything on Instagram, where people can fill out a form, put in their information, upload a photo, and upload a copy of their receipts. And then my team is reviewing every submission and making sure that people are verified the best we can. But a large part of it is really based on good faith. We can't really verify 100% of the information, but we're really emphasizing and announcing that this is for people with low income. This is for people where these cab fares are a sigh of relief for them. So if you have a steady income and you can afford your cab rides for your safety, this is not for you.
Well, that's great to hear that it's getting to the people who need it most. Now, Maddie, as of yesterday, Cafe Maddie Cab has paid for more than 1,100 cab rides all over New York City. What have you heard from the people that you've helped?
We're getting a lot of thank you messages. People who are in a tight place financially, who really were feeling so scared in the train. People who want to send their parents or grandparents to medical or vaccine appointments. Nurses in the city who have to commute to work every day, whose cab rides are taking a toll on them. And essential workers who are essentially spending all of their money they're making at their job on these cab rides. So we're really glad to be able to help and reach these people.
On top of all those rides, you have raised more than $125,000 for Cafe Maddie Cab. How surprised are you by this outpouring of support? Can folks still pitch in? And what does this tell you about people and the kindness of people?
Really, really shocked. I was really shocked at the amount of support and donations that came flooding in just in 2 days. It really is a sign of hope. It's a sign of hope as an Asian American that I didn't have for a while watching the news for a couple of months. I think a lot of us were watching videos and news reports where the hate crime was dismissed as someone's bad day, or people closing the door on us, or bystanders just watching and not helping. But this is a sign that not everyone is a bystander turning a blind eye to our pain. There's a lot of people standing in solidarity with us and wishing us safety.
That is comforting during these anxious times. Real quick, if folks still want to pitch in, can they?
Yes, we're open to donations. Initially, $100,000 seemed like a lot of money, so we closed the donation temporarily. But with the demands right now, I think we're going to last about 10 days.
All right.
So donations are back open, and you can donate on stimulus.app and scroll down to our cause.
All right. Floodgates are open again, so feel free to donate.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for what you're doing. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us to talk about it.
Thank you.
Coming up, the science guy himself, Bill Nye.
We'll chat about the new Vaccine 101 course he's offering for young students. Next.
All eyes are on the royal family as they mourn the loss of their patriarch. Prince Philip is being remembered by his loved ones as an extraordinary man who always put his family first. NBC News foreign correspondent Kelly Kobaye is at Windsor Castle with more on these touching tributes. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning, Savannah. Yes, tributes from both Prince William and Prince Harry, and very personal tributes and touching ones as well. You could see both of the brothers' personalities come through and what they had to say about their grandfather, Prince Philip. Meantime, the family is having to make the very difficult decision of who will be among that intimate group of 30 allowed inside St. George's Chapel for the service on Saturday. This morning, the Queen is at Windsor Castle, preparing for Saturday's funeral for her husband of more than 70 years, Prince Philip. Her grandson, Prince Harry, back at Frogmore Cottage for the first time in over a year. Harry and brother Prince William presenting a united front after a year of tension, sending out separate but coordinated tributes to the family's patriarch. The brothers back in the same country and set to meet this week for the first time since Harry and Meghan's explosive Oprah interview. William shared a picture of his son Prince George with his great-grandfather, saying he'll never forget Philip coming to collect them in his carriage. Carriage racing was Philip's favorite sport later in life. William called his grandfather an extraordinary man and part of an extraordinary generation, adding, "Catherine and I will continue to do what he would have wanted and will support the Queen in the years ahead. I will miss my grandpa, but know he would want us to get on with the job." Prince Harry, no longer a working royal, called his grandfather a man of service, honor, and great humor, and the master of the barbecue, writing, "Thank you for your service, your dedication to Granny, and for always being yourself. Meghan, Archie, and I, as well as your future great-granddaughter, will always hold a special place for you in our hearts." Signing off with a Marine term, a nod to Prince Philip's 64 years as Captain General of the Marines, a title and job he handed down to Harry, who held it for 3 years before stepping aside from his royal duties. Philip reportedly called the Oprah interview madness, according to his longtime friend and personal biographer.
I know that the Duke of Edinburgh's rule was, don't talk about yourself. Don't give personal interviews. I know that, and I know he told his children that.
He says Philip loved and admired his grandson, but thought his decision to step down was the wrong thing to do. Politicians honored Philip for his lifetime of service. At the Houses of Parliament, a moment of silence and a tribute from the Prime Minister.
I suspect, Mr. Speaker, that he might be embarrassed or even faintly exasperated to receive these tributes. He made this country a better place.
And both of Prince Philip's grandsons, Harry and William, said that Prince William would have just wanted wanted everyone, I should say, to get on with the job. And that is what the Queen plans to do after her 2 weeks of mourning, Savannah, just a couple of days after her 95th birthday. Savannah?
Kelly, thank you so much.
Kids aren't eligible for the coronavirus vaccine just yet, but some could be weeks away from being able to get the shot.
Pfizer is asking the FDA if it can administer its vaccine for children ages 12 to 15. Moderna is also in the process of testing its vaccine on kids. Like adults, kids have a lot of questions about the vaccines and the process itself. So why not bring in someone who knows a lot about science and a lot about how to help kids understand it? Bill Nye, the Science Guy, is here.
Bill, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
It's so good to be joined.
I love to hear that. Now, a lot of us grew up watching your show. It helps you as kids to understand science. Maybe some of us adults don't understand science as much as others. But tell us more about this new show, which focuses on viruses and vaccines and helping kids understand them. What inspired you to do this?
Well, I was approached with respect.
That'll do it.
Tutors, which is a company that is providing classes online during the pandemic. And so I guess there'll be classes online indefinitely. But I have written and done TV shows about germs for decades. And along this line, this pandemic is consistent with previous pandemics. The notorious or infamous one was in 1918, where 50 million people were killed by the flu. So in that sense, this pandemic is perfectly analogous, but it's also quite different in that the world is so different. That is to say, everybody gets on planes, flies all over the place. And this virus came almost certainly from bats to some intermediate species to some human and then to us. And so our immune systems weren't ready for it at all. But now we have these extraordinary vaccines based on 30 years of understanding of what I like to call evolution, understanding DNA and RNA, ribonucleic acid. and how you could stimulate our immune system to get ready for it. It's amazing. But the idea of fighting germs and germs being troublesome goes way, way back.
Now, Bill, I think a lot of adults would have a ton of questions in general about what you just said. We've all woken up to different headlines than we heard the day before. It's confusing for all of us. And for little kids who are dealing with that, and then also they're having to do remote learning, having to learn how to wear a face mask. I'm sure there's a lot of confusion, concerns, questions. What are some of the things that you're hearing from these kids? What are they asking you?
Well, with respect, grown-ups, as respectful as I can be, kids have no trouble understanding this. Sick. I mean, you don't want to get sick. Okay, so wear a mask, wash your hands, and when you can get vaccinated, I know you're a kid, if you're a kid at this point, do so. If you have grown-ups in your life, have them get vaccinated. And a fundamental idea, everybody, and okay, this, shoot the messenger or what have you, but if you don't get vaccinated, your body becomes an incubator, a place for a germ to mutate. And this mutated form, what everybody is calling a variant, the variants are very, very dangerous. And so the fewer variants we create, the better off we're all going to be. So this idea that you have a choice to not get vaccinated is misplaced.
One of the biggest fears for a lot of kids is needles. They're scared of the needle. What do you do to help ease their fears?
Kids are scared of needles? So,
yeah.
All right, so everybody of any age is fascinated with their body. Everybody talks about their health from the moment you start in on bodily processes from 2 years old all the way to you're 122 years old. And so as far as the needle goes, it's over in a moment. You've seen it. They poke you in the arm and it's done. Look away for a few seconds and it's over with. As far as needles, have you ever had a splinter? Yes, you have. What's the best thing is to get the splinter out. That is a much more aggressive, painful thing than a needle. So there's an expression, I don't know if you're familiar with it. Quit ya bitchin'.
I have heard that one.
Needles. I'm afraid of dying. You know what else? I'm afraid of you killing me with your mutated germ. So, wow. Excuse me.
Bill,
I
have heard that one quite a few times. I wonder what that says about me. Bill, for anybody who wants to hear more of this type of information, where can kids and parents sign up?
Well, we're doing a class on Varsity Tutors next Tuesday. And the word class, it's going to be online like this. And we're going to talk about how vaccines work. We're going to talk about how germs work and how vaccines work, how viruses are different from bacteria. And by the way, if you're a human, and a lot of my friends are, no, I mean, dogs are pretty good. But if you're a human, what is the most dangerous animal you're going to face? And I'm not joking, you guys. This is well documented. You might say lions, tigers, bears, things like that, right? It's mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are the most dangerous animal for a human because they carry these germs. So it's really a hard thing. I mean, I'm first to admit, it's a very weird thing to think that this microscopic organism or collection of proteins can somehow kill you or really lower your quality of life in an extraordinary way. And so it's really a hard idea. And when people talk about the scientific method, which many of us have been compelled to recite in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, that rigorous scientific method, where make an observation, design an experiment, conduct the experiment, write up your conclusions in a scientific third-person passive voice way. That really dates from the germ hunters, people trying to figure out what was going on with smallpox, cowpox, anthrax, these really, really rabies, these really, really serious germs and parasites, malaria. You have to, because they're so tiny, they're literally invisible to the naked eye. Oh, he said naked. Oh my goodness. They're literally invisible without a microscope. You have to address it in a really rigorous fashion. So we're gonna celebrate the human understanding of our relationship to the ecosystem. It's gonna be fun.
Sounds fun. Bill Nye, the Science Guy, thrilled to have you on this morning. Good luck with the class, and thank you for helping put all this stuff into perspective. We appreciate it.
Yeah, the info and the laughs. Thank you so much.
All right. And that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.